Everybody, and welcome to this university and to this wonderful occasion of the inaugural lecture. I'd like to welcome all of you here in the Senate room, but also all of you online. I believe there's John's friends, colleagues, family, and many from outside South Africa. So that's really one of the the advantages actually of the Zoom era, is that we actually can include everybody in these events. So I'm Lynn Morris. I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation here at WITS, and I'm just presiding over this wonderful occasion. But I do want to introduce you to the procession. Professor Thokozani Majozi, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering in the Built Environment, Prof. Adesola Ilombade, who is the Acting Head of School this evening. Of course, our inaugural lecturer, Prof. John Ndiritu, who you will hear from shortly, and then the vote of thanks will be delivered by Prof. Akafure Taibenu. So inaugural lectures are really auspicious and wonderful occasions in the life of a university, because it really represents the peak of an academic career to become a full professor. And it means they become part of the academy. They will sit on Senate, which means they get to decide on all of the important things that happen here at the university. And part of the process of this is to give an inaugural lecture. And so we're going to hear from John. He's going to profess to us and tell us about his life's work. And it's really, the challenge, of course, is that it's to a non-specialist audience as well as a specialist audience. And so we really look forward to your talk. But first, I'd like to invite Prof. Majozi to do the formal introduction of our inaugural lecture. Prof. Majozi.
Thank you very much, Professor Morris. Good afternoon, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I have this singular honor to introduce the presenter for this afternoon, Professor Ndiritu. I'll go through the bio, which has been really shortened because of the time constraints for this evening. Indeed, you are here to acknowledge a very accomplished scholar. John Ndiritu is a professor in the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering at our university, in the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment. He graduated with a first-class honors degree in civil engineering from the University of Nairobi and obtained master's degree in water resources engineering also from the University of Nairobi in 1993. John obtained his PhD in 1998 from the University of Adelaide in Australia. Before joining the University of the Witwatersrand in 2002, he lectured at the University of Durban, Westville for 2 years and the Eastern Cape Technikon for a year. John has been involved in hydrology and water-related research and consultancy for over 3 decades, and his broad fields of specialization are in the modeling and optimization of water resource system design and operation. He has applied these to a range of problems, including the operation of reservoir systems, rainwater harvesting, and catchment modeling for assessing water resource availability. Given the highly complex and uncertain environment that these systems operate in, his work seeks to integrate simulation, optimization, and uncertainty considerations, and to develop robust and parsimonious models that are reliable and applicable in practice. He has more recently been involved in the development of a rainwater harvesting guidelines for the city of Johannesburg. And I must say that John Ndiritu is a professional engineer and a fellow of the Water Institute of Southern Africa. So may I invite Professor Ndiritu to give a presentation, please.
Thank you very much. So what am I speaking about today? So probably this was actually not mentioned in the introduction of myself, but it's actually something I've done for many years. It's something I've also worked on at WITS, and I think it's something of probably much more interest than the work on optimization and water resources that I have done a lot on, considering that the inaugural lecture is a public lecture. So I'll be talking about technologies of consciousness for human-centered water resources management. And I think in the future, this is something I will be focusing on quite a lot. I'm already doing that to some extent, but it's a sort of thing that we don't find a lot of published work. And I think that's why I'm also quite keen to talk about it for many reasons. So, water resources and technologies of consciousness. So you know that the world is stressed a lot in terms of water, many shortages of water, and it's forecast that is going to get worse as time goes on. For instance, in 2040, that's what you expect on the slide. And if you look at a bit of the detail regarding the water situation in the world, so according to the UN, so 3 out of 10 people don't have access to safe drinking water. 6 out of 10 people don't have access to safe sanitation. And there are many reasons and challenges for that. One of them is that water demand is increasing, population, industrial production, and all of that. And there are many other reasons: environmental degradation, things to do with climate change. There are conflicts, corruption, political issues, and there's exclusion and inequality. I mean, these are the issues that, some of the main issues. And if you look at quite a number of those, many of them are to do with human behavior, what we do, what we decide to do or not to do. So that's actually quite critical. And again, if you look at this article in a leading journal of water resources, that is also referring to the Sustainable Development Goals that closely connect to water resources. So a survey on this particular article by water experts also found out that the water crisis, or a lot of that, is actually not about the water demand outmatching the water supply, but the other issues, so economic issues, socio-cultural perspectives. If these are ignored, neglected, or are not well understood, then we can't carry out our water resources management properly, and these have been found to be quite major issues. And therefore, we can see that water resources management, or the issues we are facing, the crisis we are facing, they are crises of governance, crises that are political, cultural in nature, with economic issues coming about, and what that talks to is human behavior, human values, and all of that. And that's where consciousness is coming in. So how do we link all of that together? So we have the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's quite ambitious. So the agenda to achieve these by 2030, to say that by 2030, our trajectory is towards sustainability, is quite ambitious. And what we need to do is ensure that all the available resources we have are utilized. Yes, to ensure that we succeed in that. And we can think about water in relation to all the other sustainable development goals, and that's what that is showing. And what we find is that water relates to a lot of them, actually all of them. Some of them more strongly, and others a bit less. But all the 17 of them relate to water, which means if you're talking about water if you're talking about human-centered water management, that means the way we are dealing with all the other goals needs to be also human-centered. But what do we mean by human-centered? So a simple understanding is that we are considering the well-being of every individual on Earth. And we are thinking about that well-being holistically. So a bit about water resources. So, and the dynamics between water resources and human beings. So this, what we have here is a typical catchment or typical river basin, and we are looking at the typical water resource developments that one is likely to find. So you may be providing water to a municipality, to a large city or a town. That's municipal water supply. Maybe supplying water to rural areas, supplying water for irrigation, for farming, and having dams for flood protection, hydropower, maybe thermal power production. Quite a lot of that happens in South Africa. Recreation. We may also want to have some environmental flows in our rivers and wetlands, also wastewater treatment. So then looking at this in a river basin or a catchment, if we want to handle this efficiently or effectively, we need to integrate the analysis together. We can't isolate one of these items from another. And that's why for a long period of time, we have been talking about integrated water resources management. And that's something we have been doing for a long time. We planning in an integrated manner. But more recently, in order to consider the dynamics between human beings and water a bit more closely, in order to avoid some things that we may not be able to foresee, because we develop a system and then something happens about the development that occurs as a result of that. And the result of that is that a few years, after a few decades, you may find that there are some unforeseen issues that are coming up. And social hydrology that has been conceived recently is meant to deal with these issues. And so if you look at now social hydrology in relation to sustainable development goals, and again, I'm referring to this article because it's an article in a leading journal. It's an article by maybe the thought leaders, the leaders of hydrology, and the ones who mainly conceived social hydrology. So this particular article refers to the need for us to strengthen basic knowledge and broaden the range of solvable problems in order to deal effectively with water resources management into the future. So if you think about that, and also consider that the issues we are facing are political, they're economic, they are cultural, there are conflicts, there are issues of inequality. Again, we see that these are issues to do with human behavior, human values, and therefore the question is, how can we handle this? And what I'm proposing, we can try to apply is what I'm terming as technologies of consciousness. So what are technologies of consciousness? So abbreviated as TOC. So something to do with the mind, consciousness, something to do with the mind, what you're thinking. So if you think about what you do in the mind, this is what I think, there's how I think, there's how I perceive reality, there's how I'm feeling. These are the things that happen in the mind. And ultimately that leads to some decisions, some actions, may lead to other things, maybe the health of my body, my connections with others. And you say that, your values are based on what you're saying you're doing and your actions, and that's also your behavior. But of course, that leads to outcomes. And in terms of what we are saying today is that we need outcomes that you achieve the SDGs And we also deal with all the water crisis, which means what we need to deal with is in the mind. And anything that is meant or that can improve that is what I'm terming as a technology of consciousness. So nothing very deep, something about what happens in your mind. How can you ensure that what happens there is the best, so that we achieve the best outside? Okay, and you know the methods that are typically used for that. We call it meditation, contemplation. Something I've done for 3 decades. So as long as my research career, when I was completing my MSc, is when I started, some meditation, and something I've been doing up to now. So probably that's why this also turns out to be something I'm talking about now. Okay. And in relation to that is the fact that mental disorders are a big problem globally, and that they're even more. The real cost of mental disorders are even higher than the other ailments that we have globally. Is in trillions of dollars. And if you think about 2030, so you're talking about UN Agenda 2030. So this is what has been focused. And mental disorders are such a high proportion of that, 16.1. So can't we use these technologies of consciousness to deal with that? Okay. And there are also other reasons why these issues, human-centered water management also relates to the things of the mind, or it's a practical thing to work with, because you're talking about human water dynamics. So we know that meditation, which is what I'm terming meditation or contemplation, other methods that I'm terming as TOCs, technologies of consciousness. Interest in that has increased a lot in the last many years or few decades. And currently they have a presence in many sectors of society. And there are millions of people who have access to those. And also, research and studies indicate that they actually work to some extent, or a lot. And also, there's evidence that there are issues or aspects about them that we ignore, and we don't recognize, or sometimes we reject. Therefore, it is of interest to look at all that. So, and if you look at this particular report, so by the American Psychological Association, called the Transcendent Mind, also talks about a sea of change that we are in the midst of. And one of the aspects about this is that although we think about life, development, and everything physically, we are saying that consciousness will be becoming the primary one. And of course, this is based on lots of research. So consciousness becomes the primary factor, and what is physical becomes secondary. And a lot of the work that is done regarding the mind and consciousness assumes that it's all a matter of the things happening, a matter of the brain, the workings of the brain, workings of matter. But it has been recognized that we can no longer assume that. That's what observations, that is what research shows, that is what experience shows. And another thing is that consciousness is able to influence physical processes, things that are outside you. You can influence them by consciousness. That is what this report is saying. And then there's some issues that it's asking. So how can we explore the mind? How can we use the mind to explore itself? How can we use it to heal ourselves and others? So again, we can use these technologies for that. And we have this article, again, by one of the leaders in mindfulness meditation, or maybe I would rather say the person who helped to popularize it in the last few decades, because mindfulness is, I think, one of the popular technologies of consciousness. So he talks about a global renaissance and a key inflection point for our species based on understanding the nature of the mind. So it's something good to work on. And what I'm showing there is how much interest in research has increased on mindfulness in the last 2 decades. So then we can go and ask ourselves, so what does research inform us regarding these technologies? And what are the implications of these on water resources management? So typically the rest of my talk will be about this. in different ways. Maybe getting more intriguing as we carry on. So this is a report that was based on some meta-analysis regarding the impact of mindfulness. So it was looking at various outcomes, which means if you apply this method, what is it that you'll be wanting to change? So various outcomes, and there are many studies that to apply to that. And the number of people involved was quite a lot. That's after filtering the ones that were not considered reliable. So that's actually part of your research. You want to assess things from what is reliable. So from what is reliable. So what was found is that the effect, based on those many studies, is that the effect is medium. One of them is a bit small, but all the others are saying there's an impact. There is an impact based on that particular measure. And look at another study. So done in the UK, quite detailed, lots of individuals involved, and using 4 measures to assess how effective it is. Again, when you look at this, you find that there was an impact on work-related stress, it was reduced. So an increase in that depends on the sort of measure that is being used. So an increase means a better state of work. Again, job satisfaction also improved. Again, depression and anxiety and stress reduced, and general work performance improved. So again, you can say this worked. You look at South Africa. So there was this study. So the study was done at the University of Stellenbosch, but the experiments or registered at Stellenbosch, but the experiment was at SMU. And what was found as well is that based on that particular measure is that it brings a good change. Okay. So what I've looked at are things about personal change, but what results do we have regarding organizational change? Because we work together in groups, in organizations, in industries, and all of that. So what has been found? So there are 2 studies here. In this case, this particular study, that was for a power transmission company. What was the aim of the study? It was to find whether transcendental meditation improves the performance of the company by training using, it was to find whether transcendental meditation can improve the extent to which TQM, total quality management, is applied. So it was found that TM helps improve the planning and the functioning, and also improves people's cognitive abilities and team behaviors. And the result of that was that there was a large increase in profits in the company. So another study. There is a study about mindfulness in the UK, and there is in the parliament. One of the interesting things. So mindfulness in politics and public policy. So in the UK, so those who are doing this are seeking to pass this to others, pass it on to others. And interesting, you have a UK mindfulness all-party parliamentary group, and it is working quite a lot to ensure that policies are aligned, or policies are aligned to the things that align to mindfulness, which means encouraging mindfulness to be included in various policy issues, and also talks about the fact that those who practice mindfulness are able to approach political discourse in a better way. And that the way people approach issues are from the heart, from the human heart and human mind. So again, I think we are talking about a change from the physical more to consciousness, because you're saying there's this change. So the fundamental reality is not about the things that you do out there. Fundamental thing is about what's happening in your mind and the state of your mind. Therefore, when you're dealing with issues, talk about that or bring that to the fore. So anyway, we can think about, so there's another thing. So you're saying that, or what we have found is that if you apply these techniques, it gives you some improvement in your state of being. But now the question you're asking is, if I'm doing that, if I do that, is it possible to remotely affect others? So that's quite interesting. So does this effect radiate out? Like you can say the sun radiates energy, so does whatever comes out of this radiate out? So maybe why am I bringing this in? Because it means that the effectiveness would be much higher, or would be better if that happens. And there's this particular study that was done in the 90s in the States. And it was termed as a demonstration study, which means it had already been found previously that TM, transcendental meditation, helps to prevent violent crime. And this was meant to demonstrate that. So it was quite a comprehensive study involving several universities, involving the police, involving many meditators. And it was done in this particular county or district in the United States, in Washington. And the actual experiment itself involved 600 to 4,000 meditators over a period of 8 weeks. And when all the statistics were collected and also aligned to the previous statistics, what was found? What was found is that over that period of 8 weeks, when the experiment was happening, violent crime reduced quite a lot. And that effect went on for a few weeks further. So simply seen in a simplified form, what was found is that as increased the number of meditators over this period of 8 weeks, the crime rate was reducing and reduced up to 20%. And they're actually finding this was to demonstrate, which means other studies have been done to show this. Okay. Okay, so then we think about what we have found so far. Where can we apply this to water resources management and planning? Yes. So in South Africa, we are talking about encouraging behavioral change on water users so that we can save lots of water. Just talking about changing how we think about water and sanitation issues. And also there are issues about vandalism. And of course, it's not just in the department. We know it is you may say a global problem or a regional problem. So can we apply these techniques? And what I'm thinking about is not, don't think about them in the short term. But this issue is there, why don't we go there and apply this technique? But have it as a strategy, as a policy, that if over the decades, over a period of time, we encourage this happening, what will be the actual impact? So can we do that? Okay, so, and something else we can look at is water resource systems analysis. So I've been working in this area for a bit of time. I think that was mentioned. So, and what we have here is the master plan for Vaal. So there's a region we are in, Gauteng. And we are talking about the yield of water, how we are forecasting water yield and trying to match that with the demand over a period of almost 50 years. So up to 2050. And what we see is that issues of unlawful water use are significant. So what you might want to ask is it possible that we can apply these technologies to reduce, on the long term, how much unlawful water use is happening? So I've worked on this for a few years in terms of trying to model this, and we had a PhD study. So Nura completed this, I think, 2019. So we are trying to model unlawful water use, including the hydrological aspects and the human aspects. And we found it's actually possible to mathematically model that. So it's also possible now to find how would an increase in technologies of consciousness impact on this. And generally, it would be moving in that direction. So the relation between how one perceives risks, it may be a farmer, an irrigation farmer, this perceiving risk. And if you perceive risk, you want to abstract water illegally. But depending on what's happening in your mind, that may not happen. Eh? So you're talking about a relationship between risk perception and your level of compliance. It is possible to do that. Eh? Okay, so then we can go to another aspect regarding these technologies, regarding consciousness. Eh? So what we have talked about is our human behavior, individually or as a group, but now we are talking about things that are outside of the human being, because it's one of the things that are considered real by the American Psychological Association, although others, I think, have known this for a long time. They have actually used this, but what does? So I'm actually asking a question, but it's like I already have the answer in a sense, but what has been seen and what are the possible implications of this on water resource management? So, okay, I'm talking about the same, if the same article again, and maybe the issue to ask here is, there may be influence on physical processes from consciousness, from the mind, but are they significant and therefore applicable for water resources management? So we have carried out some work at WITS. So there's a roof of human building, one of those experiments that we've done. And how did this come about? So about 10 years ago, we were working on a PhD on how we can improve soil retention using contour ridges. So we're calling them dead level contour ridges that don't have a slope. But at the same time, in India, there was this new method of farming, actually not entirely new. So organic farming, but in addition to that, meditating on your farm. And what was coming up is that it's quite effective. It's leading to a big increase in yield. So then I was curious to find, okay, why can't we try this out? Does it actually happen or not? So then we carried out a few experiments, and the initial ones were a bit easy, which means just take a seed and find out what is the length. How is it increasing in length over a period of time? And say, okay, if I meditate on the seed or on the water or something else, does it make a difference about this rate of development? So one experiment we did was in 2013, and we found significant increases. And another one we did in 2016, we also found generally significant increases, and there were high statistical significances for 4 of them. The others were a bit borderline, so that was encouraging. So then we carried out a more detailed study, maybe with more control. So this the roof of human building, the civil engineering building. So we had these 100 buckets, 10 by 10, and with the control and treated ones next to each other, which means the other factors are the same. So a few photos of what was happening close to harvesting and what results did we obtain, or actually how was this being done. So sitting at the Soweto Meditation Center, so the place I stay. And early morning after my morning meditation, I was spending another half hour meditating on the carrots and meditating on the water that was being used to irrigate the carrots. And I did that for 100 days. So yeah, typically that's what was happening. Meditated ones and the ones that are the controls. It was just about visualizing. So I'm at home, and in my mind I'm visualizing this, and I'm sending this energy. So the meditation practice that I'm used to, the being of energy is giving that energy, and it's quite precise. And that's how it was happening. And the results we obtained is that the average yield of the carrots that were treated was 11% greater. The stats say it was significant, and also the stems on the leaves were much higher. And in addition to that, the nutrition content also improved a lot. So as a result of the meditation. So we also then carried out another experiment in 2017, and this time we are trying to retard algae growth. Same setup, Same method. We just obtain a slight difference. This was a bit difficult to control actually, working with algae in this sort of manner, but we had something happening. Okay, and other places, what has happened in other places? So a bit of a distortion there, but there was this particular study that was done in India, and one of the researchers there, Gupta, is an eminent hydrologist, and they were working with okra. So there's vegetable called okra, quite detailed in a sense, and quite well controlled. So that's what was happening. So as a snap of one of the experiments, and you can see the intention there. So the intention is that was about the awareness of the crop and good yield of the crop, in the meditation, and what results were obtained in one experiment, depending on how much you provide that thought. It's good to call it a transaction. So the increase in yield was either 88 or 121, and second experiment, either 86 or 114. So these are very high differences, very large differences. And something else that is happening now is regarding agroecology. So agroecology is like holistic methods of dealing with farming, very holistic, very integrated. So there's something about, this also including the hidden aspects, the hidden half of nature. And the 2 chapters in this particular book also deal with specifically consciousness. So something happening quite a lot. So then what do those results, maybe how do they relate with what we know happens within the body? So I see them as simply extrapolations of what you know about the placebo effect. So this happens here about the energy. Same energy that enables that to happen can also enable that to happen outside. And we also know, about your genes being impacted by what's happening to you. You are no longer, for instance, a slave of your genes. So one can see, articles about how meditation impacts on your genes, so epigenetics. So it is not like very strange. It's actually something that is quite real. And what would be the implications of that on water resource management? So one of them would be about thinking about how much water we are using for irrigation. So in South Africa, it's 61% of all the water. I think globally it should be around 70%. So what would happen if you apply these methods? Of course, it would increase yield per unit of water. And the results show that it's significant, not just a bit, significant. And in addition to that, these approaches are not polluting, not chemicals. They are not exhaustible. And they also bring many other fringe benefits, or not actually not fringe benefits, there are many other benefits. So something we can actually do. So now if you go further about inanimate physical processes, what do studies say regarding this? And what would be the implications of that on water management? Water resource management, and also the sustainable development goals. So you're looking at that again, and maybe you're talking about some of the processes, hydrological cycle processes, and other things that we do or we find is that when you have issues with drought or maybe too much water, we pray for water, we meditate for water, we have ceremonies for water to make things happen better, but ultimately it's about, there's this something in the mind happening, and even when one is doing some ritual. So the question you might want to ask is, does this make a difference or not? So what do you think? So anyway, there are some studies that can tell us whether this makes a difference or not, and also how that, or how issues like climate change might also be impacted by human consciousness. So what I'll be doing here is to provide some background to this, not directly related to water, but something to show that, or to find out, to show that human consciousness can impact on inanimate, which means non-living matter. And one of this is this particular study, also a meta-study, which means collect all the results from many studies and try to assess that. So this was about finding out whether consciousness can impact on random physical process systems. And an example of that is when one flips a coin. So if you flip a coin, what did you expect if you flip a coin 100 times? So how many heads and how many tails? They should be about the same. So one would not expect a bias in this. So one can carry out these sorts of experiments to find if one time I'm flipping and I'm not having any intention, but another time I'm flipping and I'm having this intention. I want heads only, heads only, heads only. Would that make a difference? So what do the statistics show? So the sort of thing that this particular article looks at. So all the studies that had been done over a long period of time. And what was found is that the probability distributions were quite varied. So thinking about the case where you have a thought, you have an intention to alter this. Of course, we're not using flipping the coin, we're using maybe random number generators, that sort of thing. And I mean, in a bit more clearly, those are the differences. So the control is the one where there is no intention, just random, and they are experimental in this case is where there is a thought to move it one direction or another. And the chance that this is random is 1 in 10 million. So what does that say? Okay, another study. So that result led to what is termed as the Global Consciousness Project. And what that does is to use random number generators to try to find whether when events of global significance happen, so events that actually impact on the consciousness of people globally, when those happen, does any change in the randomness that we expect to be what these are giving, does it change? So does it impact? So do the numbers that are being generated correlate a bit more when these events happen? So that's what's meant to do. And what it involves is have many of these random number generators. There are many of these around the globe. And they started in 1998. I think this number has been increasing over the years. Currently, there are 70 of them. So what has been found out of these studies? So one event of global significance was the terrorist attack, so 9/11. And that's what was found, is a result from the analysis of the data. So before September 11 and after. And something else is when Nelson Mandela died, there was a bias in the generation of random numbers. So what does that mean? Of course, if it is impacting on the random number generators, it must be impacting on so many other things. Cannot just be targeting the random number generators. You don't expect that. So what does that mean in terms of how consciousness impacts on physical elements? So what has been done by the group is to look at various events of global significance. I mean, one might question, okay, when is an event considered global? Who decides? But anyway, they have been doing that, collecting this data and trying to find out, is the results you are getting from these what you would expect if there was no effect at all. And this particular graph here shows that the chance that it's just random is very, very small, because the result is not horizontal, the cumulative result. You'd expect it to be around 0. It's actually moving in one direction. The chance that this is random is very small. I mean that this is random is something to the power of -10, practically 0. Okay, so if you look at something a bit more directly related to water resource management, or water resources or hydrology, there's this particular experiment done at Princeton University in the 90s. So quite a good name. So you're wishing for good weather. So do you think if you wish for good weather, it actually happens? Or does it? Are there some days around that you think get much better weather than others for some reason? Okay, so what was done in this particular study was to find out whether these days at Princeton University, so reunion and commencement, so these are days when thousands of people attend or come to the university, or the grounds that they are held outdoors. And one of the things that is remarked a lot of the times is that they are blessed with good weather. So a study was done to find out, you actually have less rainfall over these days when that's happening. So comparing what happens on those days with what happens on the other days at Princeton with the neighboring areas where there's no event happening. So that was the idea behind this. So Princeton is here, and there are many other locations around Princeton. So it's about comparing the data. So the rainfall data in Princeton and the rainfall data in these other cities, these other towns. Does it indicate that there's a difference in those particular days? So what results were obtained? Actually, I'll go to the next slide because that's part of the next slide. So what was found is that if you look at what happens in Princeton on those days and what happens in the neighboring cities, in terms of rainfall, there's quite a difference in the distributions. But if you look at the following 3 days when these events are not happening, it doesn't matter whether in Princeton or the neighboring towns. So you're talking about those two particular parts of the distributions. They're quite different. So then it could be said so something is happening here. Okay, it could be said that there is less rain in during these particular occasions based on that data. So what are the implications of these findings for the SDGs and water resources planning? And I don't know. So something a bit incredible or crazy to think about is that should the climate of our minds be applied when you're doing climate modeling? So directly, which means indirectly, maybe you do that. Because when you talk about different scenarios of what? Different climate scenarios. You say one is business as usual. So we are not caring much. The other one is you're actually taking action and all of that. So indirectly, they are included. But now what you're asking is can you actually do it? Can we have the state of our minds as a direct variable in climate modeling? So these are questions that may not be so incredible based on this data, but also based on maybe other aspects. So I'm coming to the end of the talk anyway, but what can be said about human consciousness that matter? So Max Planck, I think one of the individuals who started quantum mechanics, I think one of the fathers of quantum mechanics, is what he said. So I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as a derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. So everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. So is this the case or not? And what are the implications of this? So when you're saying you're looking for the most fundamental particle, sometimes you call it the God particle. So can you look? So the question would be, who is it who is looking at it? So how can you look at something that's the most fundamental if your very existence depends on how it is functioning? Eh? So it's like you have a microscope, it's functioning properly, but you are using the microscope to look at one of its parts. So it's not logical, it can't happen. So of course, the most fundamental reality is about you. And that's why that aspect about getting the mind to observe itself is quite critical. And that is how one stabilizes in the ultimate reality, more or less. So something else about consciousness in relation to the other energies. So you can think about how power, energy, relates to how subtle the form of energy is. And you can think about it, for instance, in terms of people fighting. Okay, it's not a very good thing that we fight, but it happens. I think we have been doing this for for millennia. But initially, you can say we are fighting with arrows and bows and all of that. It's for physical. Then after that, we started fighting with guns and bombs. That's chemical, much more powerful. And for many decades now, we have nuclear bombs, much more powerful. So now, are there conscious bombs of consciousness? So, and what would they be? And how powerful would they be? So, what do you think? So, this is what the idea is here. So, the connection between subtlety and power. So, how do you place consciousness? And what's likely to happen? When we say globally, we are awakening our consciousness. We're able to connect within and awaken that. So, what's likely to happen? So maybe an idea of what might happen. We might have an idea of what might happen, but something else something that might help is to look at this particular book by William Tiller. So William Tiller passed on a few months ago. He was a material scientist based at Stanford, and he also looked at issues of consciousness for 4 decades and researched on it very seriously, in a very detailed manner. But actually, some of the things he has done that I didn't show here is to alter the pH of water without adding any chemicals. So you can alter the pH of water by half a unit. So you're talking about the concentration of hydrogen ions changing about 5 times or even 10 times without adding chemicals to that. And even more intriguing is that he was able to impart that intention onto an electrical device. An electrical device, then preserve that intention by holding it in a Faraday cage and then sending it to various places, then starting up the device with the experiment setup and actually finding, after a few weeks, this pH starts changing. He has even replicated that a few times. So very interesting. In addition to that, he came up with a theory. He's come up with a theory that incorporates consciousness into the fundamentals of physics, something very detailed. So that would be quite interesting to look at. So if you go back to the original question, so we're looking at technologies of consciousness and how this impact on, how this can be applied for human-centered water resources planning. And we were placing water in the middle of the SDGs. So what I think we need to do is to have consciousness in the middle here. And water is already there around this particular circle. It's one of the 17 SDGs, and there are many others. But if you place consciousness, which is the ultimate fundamental reality, then you can start dealing with the SDGs in a much deeper way. Like we are dealing it from where it starts. You're dealing it from the fundamentals. The changes you're creating are real changes. They are not, things that symptoms of the real issue. And then this again also relates to that aspect of how mental illness is so costly. The cost of mental illness, as we found, is even more costly than all the other ailments. So placing consciousness here is in our opinion, what we need to do. Practically, what does it imply? Maybe that's a topic for another time. And I think it's the ones involved in all of these who might want to find out. But that is what I would propose. And if you want to ask me what consciousness is, based on my 30 years of meditation experience, it's simply that. So, there's invisible, infinitesimal, eternal being that sits on the middle of the forehead. It's very powerful. That's what it is. That's particularly what I applied for all my experiments, and something that we know in the meditation organization that I practice with. So I'm ending my talk with this particular photo. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Professor Ndiritu, thank you very much for that riveting presentation. If the intention was to take us to the very deep ends of the metaphysical world, you succeeded, at least with some of us. In fact, as I was listening to this presentation, I couldn't help but remember one of the neuroscientists, I think he's in Columbia, Professor Stuart Faster, who said that it is very difficult to find a black cat in a dark room, particularly if that cat is not there. So you've taken us to the darkest end of a very, very complex subject. Whenever we talk about water, we seldom ever look at consciousness. We seldom ever look at the social dimension. For you to have done that so eloquently is really outstanding. I think let's give Prof. Ndiritu another. I'm now starting to think I don't understand water. But I think with those words, I won't say more. I'll reserve the rest for Professor Taik Ben, Akpofore Taik Ben, who is the former head of School of Civil Engineering, to give us the vote of thanks. Can you come?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are here and those of you who are online, I extend special thanks to our speaker this evening, Professor John Ndiritu, who has given us an intriguing and robust presentation on technologies of consciousness for human-centered water resources. An inaugural lecture is a very important milestone in the life and the career of an academic who has attained the pinnacle of a full professor in the university. Professor Ndiritu has given a very distinguished treatise of the topic. And this reflects the enlargement of the boundaries of knowledge from what we commonly refer to as classical and deterministic hydrology and water resources, which was commonplace in the 20th century, to stochastic hydrology and water resources, which attempts to, and which you have worked on, which attempts to quantify uncertainties. And then to the issues of social hydrology and water resources, which brought in the human element and the need for the social integration of humans with water resources management. And now you have broadened our knowledge and expanded our understanding of the subject by looking at the psychological aspect and that influence on how we handle the planning and management of water resources. This is truly intriguing, and I wish to thank you very much for this lecture. And I also wish to, and I wish you every success as you pursue this in your future endeavors. I wish to also specially thank Professor Lynn Morris, the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation, for hosting this very special event of the inaugural lecture of Professor John Ndiritu. We benefit a lot from your able leadership in promoting research and innovation in the university. Thank you. I now want to extend a special thanks to Professor Tokozani Majosi, the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment, who introduced the guest speaker this evening. We are truly appreciative of the sterling work that you have done for the faculty in the past few months that you've been in office, by stimulating research and innovation, and also by raising the bar of what is attainable in the research and innovation space in the faculty. Thank you. I take the opportunity to thank Professor Adeshola Ilemobade, the acting head of the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering, for gracing this August occasion of the inaugural lecture of Professor Ndiritu. Now, I turn my attention to the audience here in the Senate room of the university and many more individuals online who have made this event a very lively and memorable one. Without your attentive participation in this inaugural lecture, it will not have been most fulfilling for the speaker, Professor John Ndiritu, and the organizers of the event. Thank you very much for your participation in this lecture. And finally, I extend special thanks to those in the background, led by Rachel Asumke and her team in the event department of the university for arranging this event in this hybrid mode. Sometimes we don't really acknowledge what you guys do. Thank you very much. Thank you for making this inaugural lecture possible. Once again, thanks to you all.
Thank you, Prof. Tai, with those words. Ladies and gentlemen, this now brings us to the end of the proceedings for this evening. Thank you very much for coming again. Thank you.
I feel very happy with what happened today. I think I feel I was able to achieve what I thought was possible in an inaugural lecture. And I think I'm very happy. Yes, very happy.
One of the missions of the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering is to be the leading school of civil and environmental engineering in Africa. To arrive there, we find we need to transverse the traditional boundaries of civil engineering and be more holistic in the way that we approach solutions for civil society. Because civil engineering is all about engineering for civil society.
You know, becoming a full professor at WITS is a very prestigious event, and John is now going to join the Senate at our university and be involved in the decision-making process. And so we're delighted to welcome him into this group, and we look forward to benefiting from his wisdom. So once again, congratulations, John.
Shanti, everyone. I personally enjoyed seeing our brother, Prof. Ndiritu now, who is inspiring and spreading the word of consciousness throughout the world, in our homes, in the streets, in the conferences, in the academia, in the schools. It was very nice sitting here and seeing how He merged the two between spirituality and consciousness and academia. It was wonderful seeing our brother shine.
The original technologies we use, the models, the water resource models, statistical models. So he's approaching it in a different angle of using consciousness of the mind. So that was really mind-blowing to say everything starts with the mind, so we can also manage our water resources using our consciousness.
Topics around water tend to be political at worst, but they tend to be very technical at best. But to include the consciousness and the mind in the discussion, it's something else. And I think it's an area that is developing or evolving quite rapidly the world over, but it's something that I really wasn't aware was also taking place in my own backyard here at Wits University. And he articulated the message quite eloquently in terms of how this could play a very big role in addressing some of the fundamental issues in terms of water. And then I think having someone of Professor Ndiritu's caliber in our midst really bodes well for an institution of this kind. We are an institution that is really starting to ask ourselves, to what extent is our research impactful? To what extent does our research change lives for the better? So having research of this kind taking place at Wits University is really, really pertinent. It's something that we should support. It's something that we should at all times pursue.
When it comes to this whole integrated solution of including consciousness, human consciousness into advancing into other water resources, it's very, very interesting as to how we are not being stereotypical about resources. We are not being stereotypical about solutions we come up with in terms of finding new water resources and preserving this water. We are looking at every direction we can in order to just preserve the scarce resource, since South Africa is a dry area.
So I think that is quite an intense and an outrageous way of looking at water resource management. So that's quite interesting.
And so Prof. Ndiritu's talk is a talk that is pushing the boundaries in terms of traditional civil engineering and pushing us to see the impact of the intangibles on what we traditionally see as our mandate in society, which is very tangible, it's infrastructure. But the talk is pushing us to think beyond just the physical and providing physical things for civil society to the intangibles, how our minds interact with the tangible. So I must congratulate him for presenting such a unique and a very different kind of inaugural lecture.
So everyone is very happy, or everyone I have spoken to is very happy about the presentation. I think everyone has picked up one or two things. Yes, actually not just one or two things, but lots of good understanding or good perspectives, or maybe other questions that they never thought about. So in brief, that is what I can remember regarding the responses. So everyone is congratulating me for giving a very good lecture.